Every review of Edge of Tomorrow says the same thing in the first paragraph. It's Groundhog Day with Space Marines. That comparison isn't wrong, is also not the interesting part. The interesting part is what Edge of Tomorrow does differently with the exact same core idea, stuck reliving the same day, and why that difference is the whole reason the film works as well as it does. Start with what the loop actually is mechanically, because the film is unusually specific about it for this kind of story. Major William Cage, a public relations officer with zero combat experience, is forced onto the front line of a losing war against an alien species called mimics. He dies within minutes of landing, and wakes up at the exact same point 24 hours earlier, forced to live the day again. The film gives this a genuine, if slightly shaky, in-universe explanation. The aliens themselves possess this exact ability, resetting time whenever a key alpha creature dies in battle, which is how they've been winning every engagement against humanity without ever losing ground. Cage is soaked in an alpha's blood as it dies, and accidentally inherits the power himself. That detail is the actual key to what separates Edge of Tomorrow from Groundhog Day, and it's worth being precise about it. Groundhog Day never explains why Phil Connors is stuck reliving the same day. It doesn't need to. The loop exists purely as a device for personal transformation, forcing a selfish man to slowly become a better one through repetition, and the story is explicitly uninterested in the mechanism. Edge of Tomorrow does the opposite. It ties the loop directly into the plot's actual stakes. Cage isn't just growing as a person, he's using each repeated day as literal tactical rehearsal, memorizing enemy positions, timing, and mistakes, turning failure into data the same way a video game player learns a boss fight through repeated attempts and respawns. Critics and audiences notice this immediately. It's less man learns to be kind and more man learns to win, with the loop functioning as a training montage compressed into the plot mechanics themselves rather than a separate scene. This isn't a new idea on its own. The time loop had already been used differently even before Groundhog Day made it famous. 1990's 1201 gives its resetting day a pseudo-scientific explanation involving a botched physics experiment, closer in spirit to Edge of Tomorrow's approach than to Groundhog Day's shrug. Source code, 4 years before Edge of Tomorrow, used repeated attempts at the same 8 minutes as a genuine investigative tool, with the protagonist gathering new information each cycle to solve a crime. What Edge of Tomorrow adds isn't the concept of a functional information-gathering loop. It's doing that at the scale and intensity of a full-blown war film, with death itself as a reset button, which is a much higher stakes, more visceral version of the same trick. And it's worth being fair to Cage here too, because the film he doesn't start out as a tactical genius calmly rehearsing a battle plan. The first handful of loops play out exactly how anyone actually thrown into that situation would react. Panic, confusion, desperately trying to run or hide, or explain his way out of a fight he doesn't understand, dying badly and pointlessly more than once, before the pattern even properly sinks in. It takes him several reincarnations just to accept what's happening to him at all, let alone start using it deliberately. That's a genuinely important beat, and it's easy to skip past in a quick summary of the video game respawn idea. The character doesn't arrive already treating the loop as a training tool. He has to earn that mindset the same slow, undignified way anyone would, which is what makes the eventual competence feel like growth, rather than a power-up that was simply switched on. The relationship with Rita Vrataski is where the film's real emotional engine sits, and it only works because of one specific detail. She's been through this exact thing herself. When Cage first tracks her down and tries to explain what's happening to him, she doesn't know him and doesn't particularly want to. To her, he's a stranger with a strange story, and there's no instant trust or spark. What changes that is recognition, not romance. She'd lived through her own version of the loop years earlier, at the Battle of Verdun, dying and resetting well over 300 times, including watching someone she cared about die repeatedly before she eventually lost the ability to a blood transfusion. She's the only person alive who actually understands, from the inside, what Cage is going through, not sympathetically, but literally. That shared, specific experience is what turns her from a reluctant, tactical asset into someone who genuinely grasps what this could mean for the war, and it's why their dynamic reads as earned rather than a standard issue action movie pairing. The relationship with the rest of Cage's squad works on a completely different, almost sadder logic, precisely because they don't share that history. Every time the day resets, Cage remembers them, their names, their fears, the small jokes and grudges built up across dozens of repeated attempts, while they meet him fresh each time with no memory of ever having known him. It's a one-sided intimacy. He can come to know people deeply, while to them he's perpetually a stranger on day one. That asymmetry is what makes the loop feel like more than an action gimmick. It's lonely in a way the film never has to state outright, because Rita is the single exception to it. The one person Cage's growing knowledge and history can actually be shared with, rather than carried alone. Worth being honest, though, the mechanism doesn't fully hold up if you push on it, and that's a fair criticism worth including rather than glossing over. If the ability comes from the alien's own blood, and any alpha's death should theoretically trigger the reset for the alien hive mind too, the film never really explains why the aliens themselves don't appear to notice or adapt to their own resets the way Cage does. There's a second loose thread too, right at the very end. Every one of Cage's resets throughout the film returns him to the exact same waking moment, regaining consciousness on the Heathrow airfield tarmac. The point his very first death occurred, but the final reset, after killing the Omega, drops him further back than that to the helicopter ride into Trafalgar Square that opens the film, well before the airfield, before his demotion even happens. The film never explains why that one reset reaches back further than every reset that came before it. It's a genuine, commonly flagged gap rather than a nitpick. It's usually the first thing pointed to whenever people discuss what a sequel would actually need to resolve. Both of these are rules built to serve the plot, rather than a fully airtight piece of world building, and several critics have pointed this out directly. That's a real weakness, but it's also arguably beside the point. The loop isn't there to survive a physics lecture. It's there to let the film show, moment by moment, a coward becoming competent through nothing but repeated failure. And on that specific job, almost everyone agrees it succeeds. And that's really the case for why this deserves its own look, separate from any conversation about a sequel. The ending earns itself. Cage's arc, reluctant, cowardly bureaucrat to someone capable of ending the war, is delivered almost entirely through the loop mechanic itself, not told to the audience in dialogue. When the film finally removes the safety net, at exactly the moment it needs the stakes to feel real again, it's the loop structure doing that work, not a plot twist bolted on separately. And the very last beat takes that asymmetry from the squad relationship and turns it up to its most painful setting, right at the point a conventional film would just let the hero win cleanly. Killing the Omega doesn't just end the war, it collapses the loop the mimics themselves had been controlling, dropping Cage into a genuinely new timeline where none of what he lived through technically happened to anyone but him. There's no medal, no announcement, no one who knows what he actually did. The world only registers a decisive explosion in France, a war suddenly won, with no idea a single soldier reliving the same day hundreds of times was the reason why. He finds Rita again at the end, and when he approaches her, all she says is, "Yes, what do you want?" Polite, guarded, completely unknowing. To her, in this timeline, he really is a total stranger. All of it, the hundreds of shared attempts, the trust built loop by loop, the one person who finally understood what he was going through. Gone from her side of the memory entirely, even though it's still everything to him. It's the same lonely asymmetry the squad relationship set up earlier in the film, just delivered at the worst possible moment, dressed up as a happy ending. And Cage's response to that line isn't disappointment. It's a huge, genuine grin, because he's just relieved she's alive at all. Memory or no memory, credit or no credit, which says something quietly devastating about what he's actually learned to value by the end of all this. Whatever conversation exists about a follow-up, and there's clearly enough affection for this film, boosted hugely by its second life on streaming, that one keeps getting talked about. That conversation is really about box office and audience appetite, not about a story that was left unfinished.